are these people?
Obsolete fleet, right? I've talked about it a ton, how our military are paper tigers. You know, it's essentially money laundering towards our military industrial complex, and maybe it might not be the most efficient thing, right? So Declassified UK again, Richard Norton-Taylor, right? The giant warship sinking Britain's budget. If Chancellor Rachel Reeves is serious about public finances, she must stop the Royal Navy's aircraft carriers causing a black hole in the military budget. You ever been on an aircraft carrier, Colin? You ever
Nope.
seen? Okay, been on one. Like it was mothballed, but nonetheless, they're massive. They are massive things. They are small cities on the water. That is what they are, right?
Yes.
So, as Labour presents the public with large tax rises and cuts in services, Britain's armed forces are wasting billions of pounds of public money on projects with no practical use in present or potential future conflicts. It would be nothing short of a scandal if they are given more taxpayers' money to spend. Prime candidates for the chop and an immediate target for the government's proposed office for the value of money should be the two aircraft carriers, the Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales, the largest ships ever built for the Royal Navy. Independent analysts are starting to question the future of the carriers, something that was unthinkable not so long ago. There is speculation that at least one could be mothballed. Shortly after he retired as chief of the Defense Staff, General, now Lord, David Richards describes the ships as unaffordable, vulnerable metal cans. They were behemoths, he told me. Accurate. Vulnerable metal can behemoth is accurate. But we should not expect any brave proposals from the government's defense review. Its panel consists of Lord George Robertson, Tony Blair's defense secretary, and former NATO Secretary General Fiona Hill, former advisor to Donald Trump, described by the government as a foreign policy expert, and General Sir Richard Barrons, former deputy chief of the defense staff. None of them are likely to rock the boat. Sounds about par for the course, no?
Right.
One of Cameron's first proposals when he became prime minister in 2010 was to get rid of the carriers. He was told it would cost more to cancel the contract with the shipbuilders led by BAE Systems than to continue building them. So how the hell does that work? Rory Stewart, a former Conservative minister, wrote in his memoir that Cameron pushed ahead with buying two aircraft carriers we didn't need, had no carrier groups to escort, that's a big deal, and for which we could not afford any planes. So you kind of need those things for aircraft carriers to work. So
right.
That's how these things work. So Kit Clarenberg, friend of the show, 2.5 months after I declared the deaths of U.S. aircraft carriers after Washington's embarrassing drubbing by Ansar Allah in the Red Sea, and in turn Western hegemony, British Navy wargame exercises conclude the exact same thing, right? So Kit had this article. This might be, I get it confused, which I dug a little deeper on a few of these. I think Kit's is the next one, but in all of the Pentagon's war games against China, so this was about the Millennium Challenge, right? Which we talked about not too long ago, right? But so this is the tweet that he's referenced. This is this one from the Times, right? The war games expose aircraft carriers. In all of the Pentagon's war games against China, we lose every time. The heavily tattooed Pete Hegseth, Donald Trump's pick for defense secretary, said on a podcast aired last week. The war veteran and television host, who will be responsible for the world's most powerful military in his first political role at the age of 44, questioned the vulnerability of America's aircraft carriers given China's development of hypersonic missiles, right? Again, that comes up frequently, right? Who else has those? Do you remember? Those
No.
hypersonics. Iran classically has those.
Oh, yeah.
As I
Yeah.
imagine Russia also does at this point. So if our whole power projection platform is aircraft carriers and is I-5 hypersonic missiles can take out 10 aircraft carriers in the first 20 minutes of a conflict, what does that look like? He said on the Sean Ryan Show, hosted by the former United States Navy SEAL and CIA contractor. Similar questions are being asked about the UK's two 6.2 billion aircraft carriers, HMS Queen Elizabeth and Prince of Wales, commissioned into the Royal Navy in 2017 and 2019, respectively. So, $6.2 billion, Colin, is a lot of monies.
Yes.
Pounds. That's twice as much. That's like 10 billion or something, right? So, Matthew Seville, Director of Military Sciences at the Royal United Services Institute, said missile technology was developing at such a pace that it was become more feasible to locate and track aircraft carriers. A carrier strike group typically consists of 2 Type 45 destroyers for air defense, 2 Type 23 frigates for anti-submarine warfare, a submarine, a fleet tanker, and a support ship. One of the problems with Queen Elizabeth is if they do that full fat protective approach, then you have just put most of the deployable Royal Navy around one target. You can protect the carriers, but then the Navy has to put all its eggs in a particularly large and expensive basket. This is the problem with carriers, right? Is that they need so much more protection than all the other boats need, right? Like, that's mainly part of it. I don't know if you've ever seen like a carrier flotilla from us, right? But it's like multiple patrol boats, multiple frigates, couple of destroyers, like fuel, right? I mean, we have like 2 or 3 of those going around the world at any given time, right? So a lot of money. So this is from Kit's article, right? He writes, an Al Mayadeen investigation of July 19th laid bare the U.S. Navy's crushing defeat by Yemen's Ansar Allah and Washington's initially vaunted Operation Prosperity Guardian. Western media has finally acknowledged the empire's comprehensive trouncing by God's partisans in an epic David v. Goliath triumph. Elsewhere, too, reporting on the much-typed USS Eisenhower aircraft carrier strike groups returned to base after months of relentless bombardment by the resistance amply underlines how aircraft carriers, the core component of U.S. hegemony for decades, are quite literally dead in the water. The New York Times innocuously headlined USS Eisenhower's humiliating retreat as the end of a strategic deployment. While simultaneously hailing a heroic homecoming, the article records how, as the grand vessel neared Virginia's Norfolk Harbor, one of the world's largest U.S. naval installations, a plane carrying National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan touched down on its deck. He addressed thousands of returning sailors there, all eager to be home, and with the outlet dubbed an extraordinarily pumped all-hands call. A far more rational conclusion to draw from Operation Prosperity Guardian is that U.S. aircraft carriers have been proven behind any reasonable doubt to be a redundant relic of a bygone unipolar age. The empire's bloated, exorbitantly expensive military machine, built in recent decades, exclusively suited to one-sided gang beatings of adversaries that can't retaliate, is now unable to meet the challenges of modern warfare. By contrast, the resistance have effortlessly innovated and equipped themselves for 21st century battle. That, I think, is the problem. In our last segment, we covered like drone warfare, right? That's a lot easier and more efficient to produce with just as like capable like things. Like they can drop almost the same armaments, in some respects, depending on how massive your drone is. Usually a lot harder to detect on radar, that plus all the hypersonics and stuff. We've seen Iran pitch loads of like decoy drones and decoy missiles, right? And like then send the real missiles that cost money, you know? So again, I talked about this a ton, that it's about money and how cheaply you can murder people now, right?
Yeah.
So the Empire has been comprehensively defeated by day 2 of the 2-week-long simulation, right? This is about the Millennial project. So so the Pentagon simply, we talked about this like a couple weeks ago, right? Where this like big war games thing happened where we lost, right? But I wanted to look at like the actual rule changes, which we didn't like look at. So the Pentagon restarted the exercise and began changing the rules, right? So a control group steadily imposed constraints on Van Ripper, who was the like red team captain, right, playing the part of like a Eastern, Middle Eastern force. First, his military was forced to use unencrypted cell phones, right, to coordinate and plan missions so Blue could closely monitor its communications, right? So we have to know it. We have to listen to your communications, right? What Red did then was simply opted to use motorcycle messengers and coded messages broadcast via local mosque minarets, right? So they just got around this system. They're like, all right, well, fuck you. We'll do it this other way, right? This was just one troublesome, unorthodox tactic Van Ripper deployed to frustrate Blue's incursion, which was blocked by the War Games Pentagon direct referees. Meanwhile, constraints and demands on Red's operations grew even wilder. Van Ripper was compelled to switch off his side's air defenses and move Red forces away from simulated beaches and other areas where Blue's Marines and soldiers were scheduled to swoop in from aircraft carriers. So, don't defend the beaches, don't defend the air. Right? That's essentially what they told them. Don't do that and let us win. Essentially, Van Ripper quit in disgust. He's like, fuck you, I quit. Which is just amazing. I love that. So back to this original article, the Ministry of Defense then abandoned its original plan to construct carriers with catapults and arrestor gear, traps and traps on the grounds of cost. It chose instead the alternative and cheaper short takeoff and vertical landing jump jet version, right? Which then means you have to have a ton of Harriers to pay for. You got to pay for all the fancy jets that can vertical takeoff, right? The decision was taken even through the MOD admitted that the catch and trap system was much more efficient for launching aircraft with a longer range and greater payload, something it had earlier described as the critical requirement for precision strike operations in the future. So they're like, fuck it, we don't need that, I guess. We said it was important, but whatever. The MOD is now considering whether to provide the carriers with catch and traps after all, but to launch drones, thus providing the cheapest, most efficient weapons with a large, hugely expensive, and vulnerable floating base that you don't need. You could send drones off a dinghy, dude. Like a little rubber boat you could put your drone up from. Anyway, the carriers were championed by Cameron's predecessor, Gordon Brown, a commitment perhaps more than any other that bellies his reputation as a prudent chancellor of the, what's that word, exchequer? Exchequer? That's some weird French nonsense. They were built in Royce, neighboring his Scottish constituency. When Brown's predecessor, Tony Blair, signed off on the carriers in 2006, they were estimated to cost $3.9 billion. So, the author wrote a number of articles reflecting the worries of the few government officials prepared on condition they were not identified to share their concerns that the ships would be an extravagance that the country could not afford and the armed forces did not need. A former naval officer got in touch with me opposing the decision to build the carriers. Speaking privately, he described the decision as a combination of naval vanity and pork barrel politics. The Royal Navy, he added, was moving in a direction absolutely contrary to the strategic developments of our time. Yet serving admirals and MOD spokesperson persistently brushed aside any criticism of the decision to build the carriers. By 2008, their cost had risen to £6.2 billion. Ever since they put out to sea, both the Queen Elizabeth, the Navy's flagship, and the Prince of Wales have been plagued with serious and hugely embarrassing mechanical problems. They have forced them into dry dock for extensive repairs and prevented the participation in NATO exercises designed to demonstrate the reach of Britain's sea power. The Prince of Wales broke down in August 2022, a day after setting sail for the US, as a result of a broken prop shaft, which was misaligned when it was first installed. Bro, that's a big prop shaft to misalign, first of all. Like I don't know if you've seen the props on an aircraft carrier, but a pretty good size. You know? Like, dude, that's like misaligning a rod that's like fucking this big, dude. How do you do that? You know? That's not just like an oopsie poopsie. You know? Like, that's a fuck up there. Like, that whole rod had to be fucked. The ship commission in 2019 had already been flooded twice in its first year of service. It was taken to Royce for repairs, which took 9 months. Another problem with a prop shaft was identified early in 2023 when the MOD declined to tell MPs the cost of the repairs. Similarly, in 2017, a leak flooded the Queen Elizabeth. This year, the carrier had to pull out of a major NATO exercise, steadfast defender of Norway, after a problem on one of its propeller shafts was discovered. Hey, sounds like there's a pattern. The Prince of Wales was about to replace it before a new mechanical fault was found on it, too. Which was described as a planned overhaul was postponed and temporary repairs were hurriedly fixed to allow it to replace the Queen Elizabeth. The MOD had repeatedly declined to say who would be responsible for paying for the repairs. By 2012, the cost of repairing the carriers already amounted to at least £39 million. Maintaining and repairing serious faults in the new ships has now cost nearly £1 billion, according to a Freedom of Information request. Surprised they're even letting you have access to that information. But in closing, the carriers are imposing a significant financial cost at an already pressed military budget and divert other ships from much more important roles. In any potential hostile environment, the carriers would need protection from a fleet of escorts, including anti-submarine frigates and nuclear-powered submarines, armed with conventional sea-to-air missiles, an oil tanker, and a supply vessel. All these are ships which the Royal Navy is desperately short of. The carriers would also be vulnerable to armed drones, including underwater drones that proved so successful in Ukraine's attack on Russia's Black Sea fleet. They have such large radar signatures and are so slow that they would be increasingly vulnerable to fast long-range missiles being designed by China and Russia. China is developing over-the-horizon anti-ship missiles like the DF-21D with a range of more than 15,000 nautical miles. The carriers would be sitting ducks. Tellingly, Rishi Sunak's government recently decided to not send the Prince of Wales to the Red Sea to protect merchant ships from Houthi missiles, fearing that it was too vulnerable from attacks. The Carrier Strike Force and Trident nuclear missile system are Britain's most expensive military projects. Neither are relevant to the real threats facing Britain: terrorism, cyber attacks, drones, and overseas operations, and other forms of asymmetric warfare. Even expensive surface ships have been criticized as being a waste of money. Referring to attacks in the Indian Ocean, Lord Richards remarked to me, "We have 1 billion destroyers, £1 billion destroyers trying to sort out pirates in a little dough with RPGs, rocket-propelled grenades costing $50 with an outboard motor costing $100. So, sound about right? Sound about what we do too? You know?
Yep.
So, one respected commenter has gone as far as suggesting, do we really need a Navy anymore? Far from being useful weapon systems, the carriers, like Trident, are little more than status symbols. So, thoughts?
Monkey see, monkey do.
Mainly, yeah. I mean, it's also military-industrial complex and just stuck in their ways. Old generals and not understanding what actual warfare is now. You know, like America's military runs on this thing called supremacy, quote unquote, right? Where it's like, we have to be so much bigger than all the militaries combined in case of any outcome. Okay? So I don't know if that works anymore. And I think it's a giant waste of money. Clearly, the places with less money than us are having problems maintaining their versions of it. So, yeah, I just wanted to bring people to light that little bit of information. I found it interesting. So, but anyway, talking about these things is most likely why we're demonetized. So you can scan that QR code on your screen, go to co-fi.com/indienewsnetwork, leave us a little dollary dues. We might be able to buy one of those carriers if they go on sale. Who knows? But we'll take them for a massive loss. But if you can't help us monetarily, just like and subscribe, share the stream, comment underneath, tell us what you think. Are we full of shit? Are we not? We don't know. Let us know. But otherwise, thanks for watching.